Hello, class, and welcome to the beginning of week 5, which is the last week of this class because this is a 5-week summer session class, which is why we've been burdening you with so much work and making you do so many things in rapid fire succession. But everyone's been keeping up really well. We're a little concerned that not too many of you have handed in your paper for week 4 yet, but we'll be sending out a reminder about that tonight. And I'm sure that you're all just going to be working right up until the deadline of midnight. But let's just reflect a little bit on some of the discussions that happened this past week as you were diving into the payments industry.
Yeah. I guess one of the things that just because this was going on in the discussion, I was paying a little bit more attention to the way payments were happening around me. And there are two places that I ran into. One was just a diner, very popular hole-in-the-wall diner near where I am. They had a big cash-only sign out front, and I took a picture. I'll throw up a picture on the video here when we post-process. My kids thought it was very strange that I was taking a picture of the laser-printed sign that said cash-only. But after talking to the guy at the Buell coffee shop, I realized that they were probably cash-only because they didn't want to pay the 5 to 7% fees that they have to absorb if they decide to take your credit card. And they're popular enough that they can say, yeah, we're just going to take cash only. And then about, I don't know, maybe a day later, I went into a produce stand and they had a similar setup that was cash only, but they don't have quite as much flexibility to say, if you don't like it, just hit the road because they've got other produce stands around that could compete with them. And so instead what they did is they had an ATM machine over in the corner. So they said, oh yeah, we're cash only, but if you don't have cash, you can go over there and use the ATM. And sort of reflected on the fact that it's interesting because what they did in that arrangement is they put the burden of the transaction fees onto you and your bank rather than accepting them by virtue of taking credit cards and debit cards. And Bill, you had another reflection on that as well, something else that happens with ATM machines.
Yeah, well, so, sometimes if you're in say, an independent coffee shop that doesn't accept credit cards, that has an ATM machine on site, often the proprietor of the business has a relationship with the ATM distributor so that when you go and get cash at their ATM, some of the fees that are being collected at the ATM are actually shared with the proprietor. So, there's a great solution for me if I don't want to card fees with interchange fees, but I also want to generate a kind of side stream of revenue on the side for myself, even though it'll be small. I can have an ATM set up in my own shop. And one of the bottom line lessons here that we hope that you're getting an appreciation of is that the payments industry is full of intermediaries. It's full of middlemen and women. At every step of the way, there are people who are processing the payment, who are transferring the money, making the connection and relationship with the bank to deposit the money, to clear and settle any kind of electronic payment you're engaged in. Lots and lots of middlemen, which means lots and lots of opportunities for people to collect a little fee for making something just a little bit simpler, a little bit more user-friendly, a little bit faster, either for the consumer or for the settlement into the merchant's bank account. And that provides a lot of opportunities, right, for competition in this space. If you can just do a little bit better than the next person, then you have a viable business model, especially in this world of electronic payments that's all about speed and convenience.
And if you can get in that transaction pipeline and you're taking a small cut of every single transaction that's happening, man, it's like free money. I mean, you have to do something to get in there to be sure, but there's like an enormous amount of opportunity there. Apple being a company that we hadn't really talked about, but with their Apple Pay system, they're trying to get into that pipeline from one end to the other. And Bill knew a little bit more about what Apple is doing. Do you just want to touch on that briefly?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, just consider the following. You know, for most of the era of electronic payments, uh, card networks, and up until the early 2000s, basically the only players were you had Visa and Mastercard, which are essentially network associations, the whole thing. So it's primarily an industry that grew up out of banking. But then here comes Apple. Apple. It's a device manufacturer, right? It doesn't have any historical relationship to banking. But what it's basically doing is trying to put itself forward as one of the most secure ways and safe ways to pay with your credit or debit card. Essentially, all that Apple Pay is doing is providing you with another way to pay by your credit or debit card, but it's really promoting the convenience and above all, the security. So you use Apple Pay in the moment of the transaction when you've got your thumb on the thumbprint reader and it goes deep at the point of sale at the Whole Foods or wherever you're using it. In that moment of transfer, your credit card information is actually not being transmitted between Apple and the merchant. Instead, there's a kind of virtual token that's going back and forth, almost like a single-use ticket, almost like what a checkbook is like, where you have a checkbook and every check is individually numbered. Every token is individually numbered and they're sequential. So all that the merchant gets is that token that says, yes, this is a valid transaction. In the background, behind a whole lot of security features, the money is actually taking place. But all that Apple's doing really is adding a security feature on top of the credit and debit rails, on top of the existing payment rails. It's not building a new rail like Bitcoin, not really doing anything at all other than providing this portal. Anyways, it's trying to do in the physical world what PayPal did in the online environment. PayPal also is basically just providing a kind of user-friendly portal for doing payments in a simple way without having to type information and thus expose it every single time you're doing an online payment, and have it settle instantaneously, even though behind the scenes it's taking an extra. So that's pretty much Apple Pay's play. And one really interesting, funny media accounts of this. In spite of all the security features that are built into Apple Pay itself, there's one big hole, which is the actual process of uploading the first time you upload the credit card credentials. There's nothing in Apple Pay itself to prevent stolen credentials from being uploaded. So if I'm a criminal and I steal Katie's credit card number, I can just put Katie's credit card number into my Apple Pay, and there's no check. There's nothing that says, you don't look like Katie Lustig or anything like that, or, what's your mother's maiden name? There's nothing to kind of prevent me from doing it. And so in the early initial rollout of Apple Pay a few months ago, it had this tremendous fraud rate, not because fraud was taking place in the moment of the Apple Pay transaction, but because so many people were uploading stolen credentials into Apple Pay. And Apple's response, now that you know a little bit about the payments industry, Apple's response was, hey, look, this isn't our problem. This is the bank's problem and the credit card company's problem, not us. We're just providing this secure way to pay once those credentials have been uploaded into our platform.
That sounds a little bit like Bitcoin, because the transactions in Bitcoin, they're pretty solid with the blockchain and the miners validating all the transactions. It's very hard to do something fraudulent in that end-to-end transaction. But if you get the credentials on either end by breaking into someone's hard drive or stealing them in some other way, you can use those credentials all you want across a very secure pipeline. Seems like Apple sort of has that same feature, although their underlying rails and underlying technology are completely separate. So Apple.
I don't know, Katie, if you wanted to. Oh, sorry, Don. I was gonna invite Katie to jump in to see if she had anything to add about the discussion on the forum, or if her dog wanted to add something.
Especially my friend's dog. Actually, well, one thing I've been thinking about, this is more related to the topic and less about the actual discussion on the forums. But I'm in San Francisco right now, and I'm planning on buying some food at a restaurant or grabbing a cup of coffee and paying with Bitcoin. I'm really excited. This will be the first time I've actually done this. Surprisingly, there aren't actually that many stores that I found that actually accept Bitcoin here. I would have thought there'd be a lot. But one thing I've been reflecting on is right now I have about $25 in Bitcoins. And so I'll probably purchase a little bit more before I go in. So I'm going to be going on Coinbase and using my debit card to purchase the Bitcoin. And then I'm going to be going to the store or the restaurant and paying with Bitcoin. And then the people who run the restaurant will probably use the service to convert it back into US dollars. So it's just this strange kind of path that the transaction will take through these different rails. So
Yep.
That's been something I've been thinking about a lot.
And we hope that in your paper assignment that we hope that you're completing right now for this class, that you're having the opportunity to really reflect on all of those flows of data and money that are going through these different rails, these different infrastructures, to help electronic payments clear and settle.
Right. Just two high-level things. We probably don't have to talk a lot about them, but a couple points that came out with reflection between the public and the private aspects of some of these rails. If we don't have cash, what does it mean for us in terms of a democratic society if you have to have a credit card or you have to have a relationship with PayPal in order to buy groceries, in order to use the toll roads, in order to pay your cable bill? That's sort of a high-level conversation about whether or not you have to do business with a company in order to do kind of the basic stuff of life. And the flip side of that is, okay, well, we talk about Bitcoin being decentralized and sort of global, but what happens if just because of the nature of economics and the price of electricity and the price of hardware, all of the miners end up in one country? What if all of the miners are actually in China? Not that there's just one miner, but maybe there's 10 different major data centers doing mining. They're all in China. And because of the fact that they're all in one administrative political governance area, they are kind of, under the jurisdiction of China. If they chose that they wanted to exert influence on the Bitcoin ecosystem and there wasn't anyone else mining, they can kind of change Bitcoin that way. So something about the consolidation is important beyond just the fact that it's consolidating. It's where it's consolidating, and there's a physicality to it that has a surprising, impact.
Yeah, there are giant server farms, right? There's a kind of there's a physicalness to this virtual currency that that's really important to think about. And in the final week of this class, we're going to be how Bitcoin is regulated, how the United States and various state governments in the US, as well as countries around the world, are trying to get their arms around the Bitcoin phenomenon. And in the process, we're going to be posing the question of who really controls Bitcoin. This was imagined at the start to be a distributed, decentralized system. But on the one hand, we have increasing concentration of mining activity in the hands of really just a sort of 12 to 20 large mining pools. And on the other hand, we have a lot of governments around the world trying to either regulate or some of them get in on the act, of creating their own blockchain-based systems, either for currency or for payment or for other things like the registration of title, of land title, for example. So it does get us to some of these really big questions about money and government and freedom and control. And there's a lot of legal material for the final week. There's a number of lectures about the regulatory environment. And we hope that you enjoy really digging into some of these big questions.
We also we're having an interview this week. We're having another guest speaker. It's going to be coming from Monumus, which is a payment service that's focusing on the developing world, trying to leverage both Bitcoin and the mobile ecosystem together. And so join us for that. It'll be the same format as last time, where you can watch it live and ask questions through the YouTube chat feature. If you do watch it live, throw your name into the chat feature so we can give you attendance credit. And if you aren't able to watch it live, then post a comment afterwards by watching it in the recorded format, and you can get your participation credit that way for our interview. Bill, anything else you want to say about our guest?
I think that's it. Yeah, so the interview is going to be at 1 p.m. Pacific time tomorrow. And Monuments is a company that's basically trying to use the blockchain as a payment rail, as a rail to do international money transfers. from people in the developed world in the global north to people in the global south. So if you are part of a transnational family of immigrants who are spread all over the world, the idea is that monuments would be a thing that you could use in lieu of Western Union to send money back and forth to your relatives, and will out his company, and in particular some of the regulatory hurdles that he's faced as he's tried to create a new international money transfer service using the blockchain.
And we've also had a lot of questions about our final exam. So next week we have a discussion prompt. We have a lot of readings to do. And then on Sunday night at 6 p.m. at the end of week 5, we're going to release the final exam. The final exam, you will have 2 hours to take it when you decide to start it. You can start it any time between Sunday night at 6 p.m. and Wednesday night at 9 p.m. And when you start it, you'll have a 2-hour timer. And during that time, you're going to be presented with 5 different essay prompts from which you'll choose 3. You can choose any of the 3 you'd like. And we'd like you to write a response to those essay prompts of about 350 words, more or less. And if you'd like to include any figures or references to previous documents, you can do that, but you do it by giving us a URL. So make sure you have a URL that lasts for a couple weeks so we can grade it. So you can use, a paste bin or, Dropbox or whatever you have available to you. So that's everything that I had on my list for this week. Did I miss anything?
I don't think so.
Okay, so week 5 is about regulation. We've got a lot of stuff going on. Looking forward to the final week to wrap it up strong, and we'll see you online. Bye.